Hey, good afternoon to you. It's 5:07 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, the economist of this fine radio program, EJ Antoni, is with us at 5:30. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. At the start of this radio program, Congress was on the verge of passing a 1,500-plus page monstrosity packed with all sorts of things they told us was just merely continued government spending, but it was a lot more than that. Over the course of the last 2 hours, though, boy, we've had a lot of developments. Elon Musk seems to have successfully rallied the grassroots to kill this thing, and President Trump and Vice President-elect J.D. Vance have just come out with a statement in opposition to that bill, calling for a clean continuing resolution. For more on all of the latest developments, now let's go to a sitting member of Congress himself. Republican Scott Perry from Pennsylvania joins us now. Sir, good to have you back on the program.
Well, it's great to be with you, Vince. And, things are moving quickly here. We all actually thought that they were going to move the vote from tomorrow morning up till this afternoon because, the disinfecting light of sunshine and revelation was killing all support for it. But I think it might be that the whole thing is completely collapsed right now. And, of course, this was set up predictably. Like, you've been in Washington for a little while. Every single year we do this pre-Christmas omnibus. I don't care what you call it. That's what this is, where, it's a few days before Christmas. Everybody's got to get home. Nobody wants to be in Washington, D.C. They want to be back at their homes. And so there's the pressure of that. And, of course, there's also the immediate pressure of the jailbreak. So while we were talking about maybe having to vote on it by Friday so that we had actually time to read 1,500 pages, members are signaling that they're leaving town. They're not staying. And so then that pressurizes leadership to move it up beyond, inside the 72 hours. So not only is it a huge monstrosity of spending and an orgy of policy and left-wing extortion, but you don't get the chance to read it, and it just gets jammed through. And this is how it's done here. And we have fought it. We warned our new speaker, let's deal with this last fall. Remember, we were running out of money last fall at the end of September. Let's not wait until Christmas, where predictably, the clock's ticking. Everybody's got to get home. And, I don't care what you say. Yeah. It's not going to be simple, and everything's going to be hooked to this thing like a Christmas tree, and we're going to jam it up the up the chimney.
Yeah, and one of the other pieces here is that I'd like to know is how is something like this put together? Because in the end, I'm looking, we're just we're finding out all of the contours of this gigantic spending package. And it includes things like giveaways to ethanol. It includes millions of dollars for tests of molasses purity. It includes censorship operation spending of the American people. It includes legal immunity for members of Congress, pay raises for members of Congress, increased health benefits for members of Congress, biolab funding. The list is completely endless. And I'm wondering, Congressman Scott Perry, were you consulted at all? Who puts this thing together? Did they go to each individual member of Congress and say, hey, what would you like in this thing?
Hey, I'm sorry. I'm over here howling, laughing. No, we're not consulted. This is what's called a four corners deal, which is bad enough in of itself. So what the four corners are, the leaders of the House, so that's the Speaker and the Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, gets together with the Leader of the Senate, which is Schumer, and then the Minority Leader, which in this case is McConnell, who not sure what his status is. But and they negotiate this, but it's actually not those people. It's actually their staff members. So elected members aren't even in the room. We're not even consulted whatsoever. So they put this whole thing together. It started with a continuing resolution, but then, we needed disaster funding. And every time you need something, then the other side wants something. And they usually want double what you want because here's the thing, Vince. If you're not going to countenance any shutdown for any purpose at any time, for any reason, for any length, the other side knows that they can just keep upping the ante. And so then disaster relief got put on it. Well, we have farmers that have had losses for 3 years and they can't afford to put crops in the ground. So we needed billions of dollars for loans for them. Well, when you ask for something, the other side says, well, we need 10 times whatever you want. And that's how you go from a clean CR just to get you into March into the new administration to hundreds of billions of dollars in additional spending. That's just how it goes.
So help me out, because my understanding of Congress consists of Schoolhouse Rock. I believe you're known as a legislator. Are you telling me that the legislators have nothing to do with writing legislation whatsoever?
So we find out about it. As a matter of fact, we got text, I think, last night. Including like a $25 billion healthcare supplemental for some things that we probably voted for. There's probably some good stuff, but no pay for us for any of this stuff. All in total, 1,500 and some pages, and then start reading because we're not even going to adhere to the 72-hour rule. And right now we might not even adhere to the 24-hour rule. And that's, no, legislators don't get a chance to legislate. We get a chance to vote and have an opinion and go out and support something, but it's all about extortion and leverage around here.
Yeah, it sure is. So, okay, how big of a deal is Elon Musk and company and Vivek Ramaswamy, the Department of Government Efficiency? They mounted a pretty awesome campaign very quickly against all of this. How meaningful is that?
I got to tell you, so I've been at this enterprise for a little while, and we've done the same thing every time. We being the Freedom Caucus and those kind of people that are, in the Senate and affiliated of the same mindset. And we have essentially lost on every single opportunity. We just get overwhelmed messaging-wise and so on and so forth. But Elon and Vivek Ramaswamy, with the bandwidth that they have, they joined the bandwagon at the 11th hour here and have completely upended. Like, this is upending the establishment, the swamp, the uniparty. In like 4 hours, it's completely destroyed the cultured class in Washington, D.C. that demands that we pay our taxes and shut our mouths. It's a game changer.
It sure seems like it. Are there any lessons here for the incoming Congress? What should all of these Republicans who are going to be in the majority in both the House and the Senate take from all of this?
What they should take from all this is that President Trump, number one, has a mandate. This is his majority in the House and the Senate, number one. Number two, all the things they campaigned on that they said they were going to do, they're going to actually have an opportunity to do. And when they do what they normally do, which is say one thing during the campaign and then come to Washington and do something else, I think that's going to be off the table, and they're having a strong dose of that reality right now.
How do we get to a point where, just to go back for a moment to this 1,500-page bill, how do we get to a point where you've got Republicans supporting the extension of what's known as the Global Engagement Center? This is the federal government-funded censorship operation that has hurt so many conservatives. How did Republicans end up supporting that?
Well, because it's just included in the package, and if you don't want the government shut down, so you don't want to be accused of shutting the government down. That's what happens if you don't vote for this thing. You're accused of shutting the government down. If you don't want that, if you want the relief for the farmers in your district, and if you want the disaster relief, if you live in Georgia or North Carolina or Florida, if you want that stuff, then you've got to swallow these other Democrat priorities. And so they just live in perpetuity.
Yes.
Because this is how we do things. We don't pass. I got to tell you, the Senate passes 0 appropriations bills. So how does the House, who doesn't pass all of them, but at least we pass some of them, how do you have a partner to even negotiate with when they simply refuse to do their job and get away with it year after year after year? The press says nothing about the Senate passing no appropriations bills. That's where these things are supposed to be adjudicated and meted out, but it never happens. And so you have literally 4 people in the House and the Senate determining the spending for the whole year for the whole entire government. And guess what? Those people that are in charge love that. They don't want any of that to change.
Congressman, it's also very cowardly that you have this disaster spending on places like the southeast United States lumped in with a continuing resolution. What that means is Congress is using the suffering of our fellow Americans as a means to sort of grease the tracks for other out of control spending, doesn't it?
Well, that's exactly what it means. Look, oftentimes, none of these bills are perfect, right? And so you got to say on balance, is it better than it's bad? But I will tell you, there are a lot of members that say, why even buy insurance anymore if the federal government's in charge of paying for all disasters in the country? We know disasters are coming.
Right.
We do no planning for it. And people that are afflicted eventually get made whole by the federal government, and there's no constitutional authority to do that.
Yes.
It's 82 days after the hurricane hit. It's 82 days these people have been living out in tents, and they've waited till the last minute by design for the purposes of extortion. That's exactly why we are where we are. We urged and we begged the Speaker months ago to deal with this stuff then so we weren't like rats on a sinking ship.
Yeah.
But indecision and poor decision and cowardice gets you what we got right now.
So Thomas Massie came out earlier. He became the first Republican, I believe, to voice opposition to Mike Johnson becoming Speaker again come January 3rd. Do you think Speaker Johnson is in for a tough battle to retake the helm? What's going to happen come January?
Well, I don't think there are any Democrats that are going to support Mike Johnson. I might be wrong about that, but unfortunately, those who are keeping score are watching, and on these big bills that we've passed habitually, there have been more Democrats in support than Republicans. And there are a lot of Republicans that say, why are we in the majority if you keep on doing things that the Democrats demand? That's not what the American people gave us the majority for. I'm not voting for people that continue to do that. And so I think it can still be pulled out of the fire, but Mike Johnson, I think, has his work cut out for him.
Yeah, and Matt Boyle over at Breitbart News today was pointing to all the times that Mike Johnson has made some big promises, and then when push came to shove, he fell backwards. And that could include the spending fights in the spring and in the fall, and now the one we're witnessing at the moment. The FISA fight in the spring, where surveillance of Americans continued. After a big fight over that. Ukraine aid being passed once again in the summer over the opposition of Americans who don't want to see that money given away endlessly without any explanation. And so this just keeps on happening, Congressman, and I can see why an appetite for maybe a change in leadership is growing again.
Yeah, that's unfortunately. You're keeping the score, so are members of Congress, and they don't like it, and they don't see how, A, they can support those things because they have to go face their constituents. And probably to a bigger point, they don't understand or see how anything's going to change. If this is the way it is now, why should they believe under this current leadership it would be any different in the future? And I think those are reasonable positions to have, certainly reasonable questions to ask. Now, we've got some time before we get to January 3rd,
yes.
But like I told Kevin McCarthy a couple years ago, you let these guys hang out there like this and they get cemented in concrete in their position and you can't move them off of it. I've watched this happen. I've been through it.
And finally, Congressman Scott Perry, what do you think should happen by this weekend? Should Republicans be willing to play hardball and allow the government to go into the dreaded shutdown that everybody always keeps fear-mongering about?
So we don't want a shutdown. Republicans don't want one, aren't asking for one, but we should play hardball because understand this, Vince, the American people can't afford their own lives, their groceries, their gasoline, their electricity bills. They can't afford anything anymore because of government spending. Every 100 days, we add $1 trillion. You have to break the cycle. If Chuck Schumer and the Democrats don't want to vote for responsibly keeping the government open, then they should own that. And the Republican Party should give them the opportunity to fish or cut bait on that. But it's going to take some courage on behalf of our leadership to tee that up.
Well, perhaps they're hearing you right now in Washington. Thank you very much. Congressman Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, the House Freedom Caucus. Good to have you on the program as always, sir.
Thank you, sir. God bless.
Chad Pergram at Fox reports no more votes expected in the United States House today. Very good news. Very good news. Todd is in Rockville, line 2. Todd, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, good afternoon, Vince. Thanks for taking my call.
Yes, sir.
Hopefully you can hear me okay.
I do.
I've had my experience with the sausage making now here for about 24 years, know a little bit about it. We talk a lot about the deep state in the intel community, but there is indeed a deep state when it comes to the appropriators and those people that are making the backdoor deals. Unfortunately, a lot of our new members that come into Congress, they don't have the experience. They don't really know that dynamic and how it works. And the bottom line is we need a total rehaul of the way our federal government works from a budgeting perspective. Right now, there is no prioritization process. What I mean by that is, as you were alluding to earlier, when we have something like natural disasters, when we have something like coming to the aid of our vets,
yes,
those things need to be prioritized, in the basket up at the top, with other areas that go below that in terms of subject areas. We don't do that in our budget. Everybody just throws everything into the funnel at the same time. That whole process needs desperate change.
And we need to get back to the Constitution. At its very core, that these bills, the spending bills, should originate in the House. Congress should actually legislate. They shouldn't export the job of legislating, outsource the job of legislating to government agencies. The presidency should have the power of the executive. The president shouldn't have to spend every single dollar that Congress appropriates. If he saves us money, that should be a good thing. It should be allowed. I would say let's start with the Constitution. And you're right, rooting out the deep state at every level, from the executive branch to Congress. Heck, even the Supreme Court has people undermining the court, leaking Supreme Court decisions. We've got a deep state all over the place to deal with. Thank you, Todd. You're right about that. Coming up, EJ Antoni, the Economist, is with us. We'll talk to him about the big economic news today. A lot is breaking, including the stock market to some extent. We'll see. Good afternoon to you. Now 5:36, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. CNBC reporting today on the news you've been hearing that the Dow has tanked by 1,100 points. It's posted its first 10-day losing streak since 1974. This comes after a, quote, disappointing rate outlook by the Federal Reserve that rocked the stock market. Joining us now to discuss the breaking news, the Federal Reserve, and the economy, as always, is the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show and economist at the Heritage Foundation as well. EJ Antoni is here. EJ, good to have you back, sir.
Vince, always a pleasure. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, right. So the market reacting with disgust at what the Federal Reserve did today. What did the Fed do, and what do you make of their action?
I mean, what the Fed essentially did was revert to where they were 6 months ago in terms of their outlook, at least. Right before the election, they engaged in what I consider to be election interference, where all of a sudden the outlook became sunshine and rainbows, and interest rates and inflation rates were magically going to come down next year. They made that unprecedented rate cut right before the election. They didn't even start small. They went big with a 0.5 percentage point cut. And now all of a sudden that we are past the election, the outlook somehow reverts back to where it was about, 6 months ago, where no, we're looking at higher for longer. We're looking at sticky inflation. We're looking at fewer rate cuts, not more. In other words, things are back to looking gloomy.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you view this, you said it's election interference. In other words, the Fed is being implicitly political here. They announced in mid-September, we're going to cut the interest rates by 0.5 percentage point. That's a big cut for the Fed. And that was designed to give some energy to the economy and, of course, help Kamala Harris. Now that the election is behind us, they are suddenly becoming much more realistic about the outlook?
I think that's a very fair summation, Vince. And, they say the Fed is data dependent. Well, now they're once again data dependent on actual economic data. But right before the election, I think the only data they were depending on was the polling data. And as it got worse for Kamala, they tried more and more to give the economy a shot in the arm. Unfortunately, though, when the Fed manipulates interest rates like this, I liken it to alcoholism, where you initially may get a buzz if you drink too much, but you're going to have a hangover the next day. In other words, what they tried to do to the economy in terms of lowering borrowing costs hard and fast for businesses, for consumers, and for the government right before the election, that's going to come back to bite us in 2025 in the form of even more inflation.
So what kind of challenges does this present to the incoming Trump administration? Given, you got the Fed's outlook, the meddling they've done in the American economy, the out-of-control government spending, the above $36 trillion national debt. What is President Trump looking at as he arrives back in the Oval Office?
He's looking at a lot of headwinds. So unfortunately, again, they're going to be facing a lot of inflationary pressure. Now, I think they're going to take a lot of very positive steps, Vince, to try to combat inflation in terms of what they're going to do as the executive branch, and also in leading Congress in terms of getting certain laws passed. So I think that's going to look like lower taxes, a lower regulatory burden, more energy production, all things that are going to increase the size of the economy, increase economic growth, and increase people's wages. So you're going to be looking at more money and a larger economy. In other words, people taking home more money, corporations making bigger profits. So all of those things are going to help combat the higher cost of living that's being created right now by the Fed. So it just remains to be seen which of those two effects is going to win out.
Well, let me dwell for a moment on what you said about tax cuts, because I keep hearing, I heard President Trump talk about it this week, but it doesn't get enough attention among the chattering class in politics. The Trump tax cuts, when they came through and in the wake ever since, the way Washington has largely talked about them is, oh, my goodness, this was so bad because it decreased all the revenues. How are we going to pay for these tax cuts? That's the language that they use. How are we going to pay for tax cuts? Which, of course, sounds like a very jacked up phrase. Like, what? What do you mean pay for tax cuts? Tax cuts means we're not taking more flesh out of American taxpayers. That's what that means. But the thing that you've been saying for years, and then I heard President Trump reiterate again this week, those tax cuts resulted in higher government revenues. Taxes went down. Tax receipts by the federal government went up. Isn't that right?
Exactly. And, this was a phenomenon that was really first observed in the 1920s. The Treasury Secretary at the time, Andrew Mellon, called it scientific taxation. Today we call it the Laffer curve after Dr. Laffer, who in more recent times has, with the famous illustration on the napkin where he drew the curve and he said, look, if the tax rate is at 0%, you're not going to get any revenue. As you start increasing that rate, you get more revenue, but only to a point and at a surprisingly low point. Thereafter, as you increase tax rates, I should say, you are providing so much disincentive to people to work and to buy, to invest, et cetera, all kinds of economic activity, that you end up getting less activity and less overall tax revenue despite the higher tax rate. And you can take that to the extreme to really illustrate it. Imagine if you put 100% tax on something. I don't care, if it's working, investing, whatever the case may be.
Yes.
How much of that economic activity are you going to get? You're going to get none, because the people don't get to keep any of the proceeds.
That's exactly right. It's as simple as being able to be drawn on a napkin, as Art Laffer famously did. Okay, so what do you make of this big drop today in the market? The Dow drops over 1,100 points today in reaction to the Fed's behavior. Do you have any sense of kind of the long-term prospects of the market here, and what maybe we're just pricing in all of this today and everything's going to be normal going forward?
Well, normal, yes. Unfortunately, I think it's the new normal. What does that mean? I think it means not 2% inflation, but 3%. Even though the Fed keeps talking about this 2% target, if you look at the monthly inflation data, take the consumer price index, for example, which, that has tons of problems. We've talked about that plenty of times on your show. But even just taking the official data, as understated as it is, going all the way back to June of 2022, the annualized rate over that time period has been 2.9%, almost 3%. And it's been pretty darn steady. In other words, from month to month, the inflation rate hasn't actually moved that much. So the annual inflation rate has come down, but it's not coming down very much. At this point, it's going back up. And again, we've been averaging about 2.9% annual inflation.
And what
markets are beginning to price that in.
And what you're referencing when you say inflation rate, what you're saying is that prices are still going up. They're just changing how quickly they're going up at any moment, right?
Exactly. So, Vince, I liken it to when you're driving down the road. Let's say you're going down the highway at 60 miles an hour and you're watching the mile marker go up and up and up. That 60 mile an hour that you're going steady, that is the inflation rate. It's your rate of increase, all right? But the mile marker on the side of the road, those are the prices, and it keeps going up and up and up. Now imagine you hit a traffic jam and you slow down to 20 miles an hour. Your speed, your rate of increase, your inflation rate has gone down. But the mile marker on the side of the road is still going to go up and up and up. It's just going up at a slower pace. If you want prices to actually come back down, you need to not only stop going forward, but you need to then put the car in reverse.
Yeah. What we just heard was, in its most basic terms, a calculus lesson from Dr. EJ Antoni. Thank you for that. I remember that. I wasn't very good in calculus, but I remember a lot of conversation about rate of change. Let me get back to the economic well-being of the American people. What's the picture right now? So if I'm looking at, for instance, like savings rates, the extent to which people are saving money at all, whether or not they can make ends meet, do they have $1,000 in their account to meet an emergency expenditure, credit card debt, mortgage prices, rent prices, whether or not they can even afford to find housing. What's happening right now? What's that picture look like?
Well, let's take that last point first. More than a quarter of renters in this country reported they had to skip meals in order to try to make their rent payments on time. Gee, maybe there's a reason why people were so dissatisfied with the economy and voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump in this last election. Maybe there's a reason why they're so dissatisfied with the direction their financial lives have been heading. We have well over $1 trillion in credit card debt in this country now. Families are spending over $300 billion a year just in interest on those cards, not even paying a dime towards principal, just in finance charges. It is absolutely appalling. And what's really sad, Vince, is so many of our official economic metrics have been understating the problems, and they have been overestimating growth. Look at the jobs numbers, for example. We have talked countless times about how the jobs numbers repeatedly get revised down.
Yes.
In the new year, we're going to see a revision of over 800,000 approximately to the jobs numbers. In other words, they're going to come down by that much. And now we just got data the other day from the Philadelphia branch of the Federal Reserve, which estimates that in the second quarter of this year, the economy didn't even add any jobs at all. They're estimating that it actually lost jobs. So far from growth, the labor market is just basically on its last legs, I think, at this point. Again, sorry, just real quick. Again, I think the positive data that we have been getting has been overestimated, and the negative data we have been getting has been underestimated.
So who are these economic reports written for, EJ? Who are they? Who's the audience for these? Because it's not the American people. It's not about assessing how Main Street is doing. Who's the target audience for government economic reports?
Well, it's supposed to be major decision makers, whether those are folks on Wall Street or the Fed or Congress, whatever the case may be. And that's particularly scary when you realize that major decision makers are basically getting faulty data. You know, the Fed is relying on these different inflation metrics, which I think purposely underreport inflation in order to for the Fed to try to make their interest rate decisions. You know, if you look at something like the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, the way that measures the cost of home ownership, it shows an increase of about 23% since January of 2021. So that's pretty bad. But if you look at real world data, in other words, look at interest rates, look at home prices, what you find is that the monthly mortgage payment on a median price home, just a median price home, so not a mansion, the monthly mortgage payment on a median price home has doubled in that same time. Not 23% increase, 100% increase. In other words, they're relying on an inflation metric to make their decisions that is grossly underestimating the cost of living increases that Americans have seen over the last several years.
And conveniently concealing the damage to the American people at the hands of the government.
100%. That's exactly right. And so I guess maybe the group that most is in need of these different reports are the bureaucrats and the elites here in Washington, D.C., who have no idea what is going on in the real world, who don't know what it's like for the common man, who don't know what the average American has been suffering under for the last 4 years. They need these reports because it's the only way that they ever have any contact with the average Joe and with what those people are suffering under over the last several years.
Yeah. Now imagine if those reports told the truth about the extent of it. They would, what a difference that might make. EJ Antoni, always telling the truth about the state of the economy. Really, in my view, and this is not just because you're my cousin, you're the best economist in the whole damn country. Thank you, EJ. Good to talk to you, sir. Denise in Washington, D.C. is calling on line 2. Denise, good afternoon. You are on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Good afternoon, Vince. It's a fabulous day. As I drive by, I see the Capitol building, and I want to scream at the top of my lungs, you're finally hearing us.
Isn't it great?
I am so happy that they are not going to pass that Porkfield legislation, and I don't care how loud the squealing is.
Isn't it the best? So how do you think? How did we get here, Denise? How did we get here? What do you think? Who do we thank today for this?
Elon, Vivek, and Donald Trump.
I think you're right. They deserve a lot of credit for this. Something changed. And if you were with us for all 3 hours today, you watched as all of this changed just since 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock, we start with this awful legislation. 4 o'clock, it's on the rocks. 5 o'clock, it's dead. And all the way through, Elon, Vivek, the whole team, grassroots, people like Denise, everybody, we're all screaming at the top of our lungs, enough, we're not going to do this anymore. We sent you a message in November. We'll do it again in December. We'll do it again every single day of the week. And I think this only gets better from here. I hope so anyway. I'm praying for that, Denise. Thank you. And Denise, please shout out for the rest of us as you drive past that Capitol. Thank you.
January 20th is coming.
It's coming fast. I not soon enough, though. Hey, I got to talk some more. Thank you, Denise. I got to talk some more about AI with you at some point. I will say, let's just right now, here's the basics. If you've ever tried to read a piece of legislation, it's incomprehensible for the most part. It references some other piece of legislation, some other piece of the U.S. code, which is also nested in some other piece of the U.S. code. It's designed to be intentionally incomprehensible. If Elon can nail this AI thing, they'll be reading through legislation lickety-split and having you a very quick answer as to what the hell it's even talking about. In other words, the quest for government transparency is going to improve if that power is in the right hands. I don't want Google manipulating it. Don't you deceive me. And yes, always check its work, but it could be used for good. We'll see. The great one, Mark Levin. He's always good. He's up next on WMAL.